answers, and the information should have come to you from both myself and Mark. So delighted that you've made it here this afternoon at the end of a busy day. We are delighted to be joined by colleagues this afternoon, Jacqueline Andrews and Iona Coates, who are both numeracy and maths colleagues within Education Scotland, and also Natalie Light from East Ayrshire Council. Mark Irwin and I are here, as is Lynn Yenica too. So this is the fourth session in our outdoor learning series for session 2021. We've had a few already to date, and we'll share these links with you to the end. So really delighted in what is Maths Week Scotland to welcome our colleagues and to share some ideas and inspiration around taking learning outdoors. So really hope that you'll have a chance to use the chat function to share ideas, to ask questions, and just really to get as much out of the session as you possibly can do. We're all here to help you this afternoon and to help take learning outdoors. So if I can hand over just now to Jacqueline, and a very warm welcome with you. So if you didn't hear that, the session will be recorded and we will make that available to you at the end of the session. So over to you, ladies. Thanks.
Hello, it's actually Iona here. I'm going to start off. So thanks very much, Mary, and welcome everybody. Thanks very much for joining us today. We know that you'll all be at very different places in relation to taking your maths outdoors. Some of you might be completely new to it, and some of you might be very experienced, and some of you are likely to be somewhere in between. So we'll try to cater for everyone today. We've included a wide range of ideas and activities in our session today so that no matter what your experience is, you'll hopefully get some ideas to take away with you. I have pasted a link into the chat. It would be great if you could follow the link and let us know what sector you're from, just so that we can balance our time to suit the majority of people. So before we look specifically at maths outdoors, we thought it'd be useful to look at a couple of generic outdoor learning points. And this first picture comes from the Scottish Advisory Panel for Outdoor Education and the Learning Outdoors support team from East Ayrshire, and gives us some really useful tips on learning outdoors. It can also be helpful if we view it as learning outdoors rather than outdoor learning, as it kind of makes it a less of a standalone thing and more something that's integrated within your normal learning, teaching and assessment across the curriculum. The second picture comes from an article written by Rob Bushby very recently and discusses the benefits of learning outdoors, particularly given the current context. It also has lots of really useful links included within it, and it's definitely worth a read. Before you start, you should also take into consideration national and local guidelines in relation to the handling of equipment, as some areas might not allow it or may have requirements if you are using equipment and the children are sharing it. So I'll just pass over to Jacqueline to look at the first section of our presentation today.
Can I just maybe come in there, Jacqueline, just before you speak? A couple of people may be saying in the chat that they're not seeing the screen. So a good idea to solve that problem is to hover over what it says G Andrews, and there's a little button in the middle of the screen. And if you say pin to screen, and you should be able to, that should fix the problem for you. Hope that helps. Thanks, Jacqueline.
Thanks, Mary. Yes, so I'm Jacqueline Andrews, Education Officer at Education Scotland. And what we're going to look at today is just some ideas of how you can get started. I know Iona's kind of mentioned already that sometimes, some of you will have had quite a lot of experience with taking your learning outdoors, and maybe some of you will be new to it today. So hopefully what we've got here will help support you no matter where your journey is on this. So looking at this first slide here, we would recommend that you always start with something that you feel comfortable with. So don't try and be over ambitious if it's new to you, then try and just do something small, maybe possibly without equipment to begin with, and then build up to things as you go along, because the more you do it, the more your confidence rises. And I know that when I introduced this in the school I was working in years ago, staff, there was lots of kind of complaints, oh, but it's raining and all that, and initially staff were a wee bit resistant, but actually the more they went out, the more interested they were in it as well, and the more natural it became as well. It's really important that you establish clear ground rules with your class, making them feel that they're involved in it. So you could say to them, well, how far should we go? How far do you think is reasonable for us to go? And set those clear boundaries with them. Have some sort of call so that they know when to come back as well. So for example, I used to shout out sticky elbows, and other people use other things. I tended to avoid the whistle, but some people like that. But some sort of call that they know that it's time to come back to the gathering point, and it's probably good to arrange some sort of gathering point as well that they all know to come back to. Playground markings we're going to talk a wee bit more about in the next slide, but in this slide here you'll see that there's a big kind of plastic box here, and the reason we've put this in is because it's to make life a wee bit easier for yourself. It's quite good to have some sort of box or something that you can just lift and take out with you, rather than having to gather all your materials at the same time. Now that might not work for you if your school is sharing resources or your establishment are sharing resources, but if you can, we would recommend that you have this ready to go in your class. Some of the things we included in the school that I was in, we had clipboards in it, we had measuring tape, we also had chalk. Now I would say use jumbo chalk, probably some of you will have experienced trying to use little bits of chalk and your nails get shredded to bits. But jumbo chalk is much easier for children and adults to use. Also possibly you might want to put in pencils or stopwatches. We had tracing paper in ours as well, which was really useful because you could use that for all sorts of surfaces and things like that as well. And it may be that you could have some 10 egg boxes as well that you can take out, and they act as 10 frames as well, which are really useful. We'll go through some more resources as we go through, but if you've got any resources that you think would be really useful for this kind of lift and learn box, then please post them in the chat, because this is absolutely great, a great opportunity to share. And Juliet, I see you're wearing thin gloves. I like that. I didn't think of that when I was going out and drawing images all around my house for a document we were writing. What I would say about the outdoor box as well, it may be that your school has a bit of budget and they're looking to purchase things, so this could be something that they could look towards, or the parent council of the school that my own children were in asked the parent council, the school asked the parent council to fund these, so the parent council actually created them for the school as well. So I'm just seeing some things like pegs, string, wool, skipping ropes, all brilliant. These are all great ideas, and it's great to share just now as well. I'll move on just because we have kind of looked at the chat there. What we would also kind of like to draw your attention to is playground markings. Now, some of you might be lucky enough to have these in your school already, and it can be that you can draw a lot of these with chalk, but if you have, again, some money in the budget, or the parent council are looking to fund something, it is useful to have some permanent markings made on the playground if you can. And some of the ones that we have suggested here are 10 frames, empty number lines, empty grids, Cartesian diagrams, or Venn and Carroll diagrams, because these can all be differentiated and they can be used right through from early stages right up into secondary as well. So it really is worth investing in them if you have a little bit of money. And if anybody has any useful playground markings in their establishment, please do note that in the chat. It's useful to share. It may be that you're in a kind of what is classed as a concrete jungle, and that can be a wee bit more challenging for you to find resources and things for this sort of thing. So what I would suggest is whenever you're out walking or your family are out walking, then take a bag and grab sticks, stones, leaves, anything that you think would be of use, acorn, well, not so much acorns, but pine cones, anything that you can find. Thank you. X and Y axis are useful as well. Bean bags, sticks, all great examples. Thank you very much. What we have done here as well is we've put we've given you an example of how sticks can be used, and again building up through the kind of progression of it. So first of all, starting, it's something simple such as find me a stick that's longer or shorter than your hand. Find me a stick that's shorter than around about the same size as a meter or a half meter, and you can extend that as they go on. Can you find a stick which is roughly a quarter of the size of this one? And I'm not going to read this whole thing to you, I won't insult you, but you can read through how sticks can be used in such a progressive way as they go through the levels. And I'm just looking at the chat here. Juliet, it's great to trial playground markings with chalk. Yes, good idea, really good. before getting them put down. Yeah, I think that's a good idea, and you know whether or not that works for you as a school or an establishment or not. So yeah, thank you. Hold on. So, and actually, while Juliet's speaking there, I actually feel a little bit starstruck here because Juliet, I've read, you know, both your books, and I'm constantly on your website, and a lot of the inspiration when I was principal teacher and leading this in the school that I was in years ago came from Juliet. So it's lovely that you can join us today. And this slide here has been shamelessly taken from the Maths Week Scotland event that Juliet ran, which was really, really useful and provided lots of ideas. So one of the ideas that Juliet had suggested was using, you know, a 1 meter rope snake. You can extend that. You could have, and that could be in the box. If you have a box, you could have half-meter rope snakes. You can have whatever is suitable to what you're doing as well. And another thing is if you can't get playground markings, then you could possibly use an old bed sheet or an old tablecloth. And you could have a 10 by 10 grid drawn on that, or a 5 by 5, whatever it is that you've got space for. And Juliet had also recommended having pocket 10 frames as well, so possibly on a kind of handkerchief or a piece of material that the learners can have their own pocket 10 frame as well. And I've just put in the 10 egg box there as another alternative as well. Iona, anything before we move on to the levels?
No, I think I'm going to talk a little bit more later on about some of the markings that might be useful in a secondary context, but also in the chat. So yeah, agreement again to trial it with chalk first. So that looks like a popular idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and Melissa, you're talking about lines for symmetry, and I think actually, you know, if you just have blank lines, they can be used for symmetry, they can be used as empty number lines. There's lots and lots of things that just even blank lines can be used for, so they are really useful to have as well. Juliet's saying that the Tesco sell organic eggs in 10 boxes and you're busy collecting. I'm the same. My husband's going mad because of all the egg boxes that we have in our house as well. I just think they're so useful to have. And again, because of the issues that we have around COVID, it can be that each learner has their own one of them as well, rather than them sharing resources if your establishment isn't allowing you to do that just now. So what we're going to do now, in fact, does anyone have any questions before we move on? Give you time to pause and reflect. I don't see anyone typing. Okay, we'll move on. What we're going to do is we're going to take you through each level from early through to fourth. I'm going to look at early, first and second because my background is primary, and Iona's going to look at third and fourth because her background is secondary. What we'll do is we'll take you through a couple of the slides for the levels and then we'll stop. And if at any time you have anything that you'd like to share with us for that level that you've seen that works particularly well, or you just think that you would like to share, then please do pop it in the chat for people to look at as well. So here we have early level. Some of the images that you see have been taken from our professional learning resource, and I don't know if anybody here has had a chance to look at the numeracy professional learning resource. If you have, can you just stick a yes in the chat? And if you haven't, please don't worry. It's not been out for too long. I think it was only published last month actually. Oh good, that's good, quite a few. What we tried to do with the professional learning resource was look at a balance of, well, not a balance, but making sure that we included activities for outdoors as well. And to be honest, we could have gone on and on and on, but we thought doing something like this webinar here will hopefully help complement the professional learning resource. But what you'll see here will tie in quite a lot with the professional learning resource, and it'll also tie in at the early level with the realising the ambition being me as well. So we've tried to link it all together so that, you know, it's the same messages that everybody's getting. And thanks, Iona, you've posted a link to that there, and it's really worth having time to just have a wee glance through that as well. So looking at early level, we really just wanted to kind of look at practical ideas that you can possibly use in your environment. Some of you may have used some of these already, and as I said, some of you might have other additional ideas, and please share them. And although you might be teaching at a particular level, it could be that some of these ideas can be adapted to either for the level below or the level after, or they can be differentiated as well. So just if you're not teaching that particular level, think how that could possibly be adapted to the stage that you're at. So I'm not going to read through every single one of these because you can have time. You can take pictures just now as you're going on, but I know that the STEM team are going to share the presentation. It's recorded after this, so you can look at that in your own time or reflect back on anything. But please feel free to take pictures as you're going along. I'm happy to do that as long as you just haven't got anybody else's picture in it. That's fine, but of the actual sharing screen's fine. So we'll just kind of focus in on a couple of them, and then we'll move on to the next slide as well. So the first one I wanted to look at was find the number. So there's some ideas here, but what we are suggesting is you can also hide numerals around the designated area that you have and encourage them to find them. And this could be then extended into find two numbers and add them together or subtract them. And as you go further up the school, you can maybe hide the numerals and set competitions. For example, who can be the first one to find me a factor of 18? And this is just kind of one of the type of ways that can be extended as well. Looking at time, again, we have a professional learning resource dedicated to time. And what we were kind of trying to draw people's attention to in that was that when you're looking at analog clock, it doesn't need to just be displayed on an analog clock. It can be on a number line as well. And it's quite useful to have a number 1 to 12 number line drawn in a straight line and then make those links to the drawn circular clock face as well. So, I'm at 1 o'clock. If I jumped on 2 hours, what time would I be at? And you could maybe have one in the number line and one in the clock, and that shows then the link between the two of them as well. If you're wanting a wee bit more information about time, not particularly focused on outdoor learning, then please just have a look at that professional learning resource as well. So looking at the number section of this, this can also be extended as the learners progress to addition and subtraction. So you could kind of move this into Tom has found 5 leaves and Sally has found 3. How many do they have altogether? What's the difference between the number of leaves they have? And 10 frames are really useful for activities like this as well. And as I said earlier, they could be drawn with chalk, they could be a pocket 10 frame, it could be using the egg boxes, it could be that they are permanent markings in the playground. There's lots of things that you could do, and that could be 5 frames or 10 frames as well, depending what you're wanting to do with it. And at the top, you'll see a number line drawn in chalk. And what we suggest is that you're not just always using horizontal number lines, that you're using vertical number lines as well, just to give them that variety of experiences. And the last one on this slide is patterns. And I think it's really important to note that these don't have to be just patterns with physical materials. So it doesn't need to be just, for example, leaf, stone, stick, leaf, stone, stick. It can be things such as a hop, skip, jump, and lots of different ways. And being outdoors, it gives you this, you've got more space to do things like this, and learners can be much more creative and inventive in what they're doing. And it shows that patterns don't need to just be visual, and they've got lots of time and space to create that as well. So we had planned on stopping at the end of the early level, but I'm actually thinking, Iona, I'm just going to stop now because that was quite a lot. Is there anything coming up in the chat that would be worth bringing up at this point?
Just a few links. Thanks to Juliet for linking into her maths specific resources on the Creative Star website. That's great. And there is, Catherine Murphy has suggested as well, there's from outdoorlearningresources.co.uk, some more ideas available there. And Juliet again saying hopscotches and thermometers are great examples of vertical number lines outside. And Melissa saying, looking at things in a circular manner, days of the week, months of the year, looking at them as a cycle instead of a linear timeline. A circle of life, she says. Very apt.
That's nice, that's good. Okay, so we'll move on to the next early level one, and looking first of all at the number collections. And the ideas that are written here can also be extended a wee bit further. I didn't want to spend time reading all of these ideas out to you, so what we've tried to do is extend even a little bit more on the ideas that are on this page, so that you've got even more to take away with you today, hopefully. But what you can see here is, sorry, hold on, lost my place there. What you could do is you could get them to go and collect leaves, or you could get them with their 5 frames or 10 frames to go and collect the leaves, and then say things like, that's great, you've found 5 leaves. I wonder what would happen if you found 2 more. And at early level, we're using that phrase, I wonder, a lot. I wonder what would happen if. and they can encourage each other to kind of give each other wee challenges as well. Who's collected the most stones? How do we know? How can we tell? What can we do to find that out? And another point I want to bring up just about this slide is the problem solving. Now, this is in a box on its own, but actually it really shouldn't be, because problem solving should be underpinning everything. It should be part of everyday lessons that we're doing. So although that's in a box on its own, it really should be, you know, they will be doing that as they go along. So the example here I've given is creating different structures using natural or man-made items. But actually within a lot of these activities that they'll be doing here, then they are problem solving anyway. And it's important to draw that to their attention. You know, you're really problem solving. We're solving problems here, and really bring that to them so that they're not seeing problem solving as one thing that they do on a Friday morning or something like that, so that they can see that it's embedded in absolutely everything that they're doing as well. So looking at symmetry as well, we're going to look a little bit further later on at Maths Week Scotland, and there's some other symmetry ideas within the Maths Week Scotland packs. And actually it would be really interesting to see if any of you here have had a chance to look at the Maths Week Scotland packs. If you can just put a yes in the chat, that would be really useful. And if you've not, that's fine. And if you haven't, we'll get the link and send that to you as well. And actually what I've got to say is I've been completely and utterly overwhelmed by the amount that's been going on Twitter this week with Maths Week Scotland. It's just been lovely to see, and lots of it has been outdoors as well. So if you're not on Twitter, I suggest getting on there and having a look. There's so many fabulous ideas out there, which has been great to see. So that was problem solving and symmetry. You'll also see that there's a section here in addition, but the links between addition and subtraction should really be explored together. So although that is a separate section here for addition, really you should be looking at the links between them all the time as well. So for example, if you know that 2 add 3 is 5, what else do you know? And one of my favourite questions always is, what else do you know? Well, if I know that 2 add 3 is 5, then I know that 3 add 2 is 5. And are there any takeaways that we could do with that? And then making that link and using it visually. And you'll see up at the top, I have a cherry diagram with the partitioning. So learners can use this type of thing to really explore the different ways of making 5. So they could collect 5 items, whether that's stones or whether that's leaves or sticks or whatever it is that they've got, and they can maybe mark down all the different calculations that they can make, or they can talk about it as well. So here we have 3 and we've got 2, but maybe they could have 5 and 0 or 4 and 1, and they can just explore all the different ways of doing that. And it's very physical and it's very hands-on. So that's one way of using the cherry diagrams. And as they go further through the stages, they can look at partitioning in more detail, and we'll look at that as we go on as well. In the data handling activities, it's really important to allow learners the opportunity to make decisions for themselves. How are we going to organise this? So they've collected lots of material. How are we going to organise it? So it might be that they choose to organise it into green things and brown things, or it might be that they want to categorise it into rough and smooth. Just give them that opportunity to make suggestions to it, how they want to sort things as well, because it really gets them much more invested and much more involved as well. So it's just important to make them feel, you know, that ownership of their learning as well. I'm going to stop there. Is there anything in the chat, Iona, or does anybody have any questions about early level?
There's just a few more links have gone up, including Learning Through Landscapes and the Maths Week Scotland ones. The question from Julie, can we download these slides with the early to second ideas? The presentation will be available. Thanks, Mary, for putting that in. And so you will be able to get all of these slides after the meeting.
And I'm just looking up a wee bit further there at Melissa Dunn's as well about the positional language using the painted stones. That's a great idea. So where one child hides them and then a partner has to go and find, and then the prompts might be forward, back, left, right, behind, underneath. That really helps with the positional language as well. So yeah, thanks for sharing that, Melissa. Okay, I'll move on to first level with the links in the... Yes, we can make sure, and I'm not sure, Mary and Mark, how that is, but we can put all of these links into one document that could be emailed out if that's easier for people.
Yeah, that's great, Jacqueline, thanks. I'll send out a link with the summary, any links that are shared, and also a link to the YouTube video for the recording. So yeah, that's no problem.
Brilliant. Okay, I'll get that together shortly after this session as well then. Okay, on to first level, and you'll see that a lot of the activities that we looked at in early level can be extended into first level as well, and it's the same for first level. A lot of these can be extended into second level just by changing the digits that are being used and things as well. So this really, we hope that this is kind of a natural progression on from early as well. And again, if you have examples of things that you've been doing at first level or that you've seen elsewhere, please do share it with us, because other people in this meeting can benefit from that as well. I think, and I kind of touched on it earlier on as well, if I can really highlight anything, it would be to keep making those links between the different operations. So if I skip over to the fractions, you can see that one picture at the bottom there where it's been sectioned into 4 sections and there's leaves in each section. So just using that one image there, and learners can create that themselves, or you can create a stimulus and then they have to go and do something else. There's lots and lots of different things that learners can take from that. So we've got 4 times 5, 5 times 4, we've got division in there, and we've also got the fractions as well. And it's just, that's just sticks and leaves. So it's really easy to kind of pull that together and show all the links between all of these different calculations. Just keep referring back to that all the time, because that will really deepen the learner's understanding of numeracy as well. I think, and I kind of said this earlier on as well, is if you know that, then what else do you know? So if you know that 4 times 5 is 20, what else do you know? It might be that they're looking and they know that 1/5 of 20 is 4. What else do you know? And get them to come up with lots of different things, lots of different answers with that as well. So some of them might find that quite challenging at first, because they're like, why are you asking me? I've given you an answer. You want another answer? What's going on here? But really just keep pushing, and they get better and better at it as they go along as well. And again, you'll see that problem solving is in its own box here. But actually, as I was going through this yesterday, I was kind of annoyed at myself for that, because I thought it shouldn't be in its own box. It should be under everything that's going on as well. So again, some ideas are there, but really they're problem solving with everything that they're doing as they go along as well. So here, if you look at the partitioning section, you'll see that we've got a cherry diagram here, and it's just to show you how that can be extended. So early level, we were just looking at the number 5 and partitioning it, but here we're looking at number 75, and that can be extended right through the levels. You could have 750, 7,500, and so on. And this number has been partitioned into 50 and 25, but actually, again, give them an opportunity to explore that. What other partitions can you make? Does it have to be just 2 partitions? Could we maybe have 50 and 20 and 5? Could we maybe have 60 and 10 and 5? Just getting them to explore all the different types of partitions that they could make with numbers as well. And you can just do that with chalk outside. What one was I going to look at next? And just looking at the multiplication division, so you can see an example of the Venn diagrams in here, and you can see an example in here of sharing. And what we would also draw your attention to is the grouping and sharing section within the numeracy PLRs, because what we find is that not all practitioners are using examples of grouping and sharing, and really you want to making sure that you have that balance of them as well. So if you look at the numeracy PLR, that'll give you a definition in there as well of that. Going back to that partitioning really quickly, actually, it doesn't need to be just cherry diagrams. You can also use bar modelling. And if you would like to know a wee bit more about bar modelling, we have a kind of mini guide on bar modelling that provides you with examples at each of the levels, and also into the further reading on that as well. So I do actually have the link to that. I don't know if you've got access to that, Iona, that you could post that into the chat.
It's in the chat.
You do need a Glow login to access. Oh, you're ahead of me. Great. I can't look at the chat and present. It's just too much for me. So you will need thanks. You will need a Glow login to access that. But there's lots of other mini guides in there as well, so it's worth having a wee look at that. And actually, the professional learning community in itself is worth having a look at, but you can't access it if you don't have a practitioner Glow login. So just make sure you're logged into Glow before you try and go into that as well. So just stopping there, anything in the chat?
Just scrolling back.
I think we've probably kind of covered it. There's some lovely examples from, around shape and concrete materials being used and promoting that. But I think we've probably got it covered. Jacqueline?
Excellent. And I'm actually stopping to look at the chat a whole slide early, but that's just what happens. I always have great plans in these sessions and then go completely rogue, and the people that are working with me are like, what are you doing? So we've got one more at first level to have a look at. And again, in the Maths Week Scotland packs that we talk about later, we'll talk a wee bit more about symmetry, and we'll also talk, it also has a grid reference game that you can play as well, similar to what's been we've been talking about here. So if you can access the link that was earlier in the chat, you can see them in a wee bit more detail. And for measurement, we gave you some examples earlier about how sticks can be used, but you could also find items and weigh them. If you maybe were able to take some scales outside, for example, which is heavier, 10 sticks or 10 stones? How do we know? How can we check? What's the difference? What is heavier? What is the difference between them as well? Does it make a difference if we have bigger sticks or bigger stones? And just trying lots of different experiments with that as well. The angles one is also a really interesting one, because if you were to go out and use a right angle tester in the area outside, then it does become quite clear quite quickly that most right angles are actually man-made, and it's really important to have that discussion. And I think I probably took that one from Juliet's book as well. But it actually kind of blew my mind. I hadn't even really thought about it until I took a group of learners out and we were like looking at it, and actually most of the right angles were things like that were man-made structures that were in the playground. And the angles that weren't right angles were the natural, like sticks that were bending in all sorts of directions and lots of other things as well. But you can get a really good discussion out of that, so it's worth having a look at that. And then looking at the data handling, again, just going back to that, let learners make decisions about how to categorise their findings. Now, again, if they're not used to making decisions about that, then it might make it a wee bit more tricky and challenging for them. But the more you give them that ownership, the better they'll become at it. And it's modelling. So if you notice that they're finding, they're always displaying their data in the same way, then show them different ways of doing it. And then eventually they'll start to pick that up and make those choices themselves as well. So this is the slide that I plan to stop at, and I'm just looking at the chat just now. Juliet, thanks for pointing that out, that if you Google bar modelling, there's lots that come up. What we tried to do in our mini guide was kind of take the sort of easier ones to follow, but as you say, if you can't get into them, then there's loads and loads that come up as well. Transparent right angle finders, I like that. I've not tried that. That's a good idea. I love that everybody's able to share these ideas. It's so good. Thought that all the right angles would be man-made. Oh, okay, that's interesting. Well, again, it's good to have that discussion. Having these plus resources and lift and go. Great, yeah. I found that the lift and go boxes really helped the teachers that I was working with, because it kind of it gave them less to fight with me about going outside. And I think it's just that fear of the unknown. And I know that whenever I'm asked to do something new, I do have that initial, I don't know if I can do that. But then if you just push yourself out of your comfort zone a little bit, then it does get easier. And as long as you're encouraging with your staff, if you're trying to help others go out, then or modeling as well, helping them go down and supporting them if you're able to do that, or making it as easy as possible for them. I think that's what we tried to do with the boxes, was make it as easy as possible for them to go out, because it's very difficult when you've got classes of 33 in front of you and you've got 6 lessons to teach that day. It's challenging. Just reading your comment there, Juliet. Juliet, can I just invite you in to explain that one, if that's okay, about the right angles, if you don't mind?
Okay. Hi. Yes. So if you look at the leaf, and I'm just frantically looking around to see, am I on video or not? Or is it just you can hear me?
Can just hear you.
Okay, so if you look at a standard leaf, like a beech leaf, you've got the main stem going up, and then you've got the leaf veins coming out. And if you look at the relationship of the leaf veins to each other, very often there's right angles in there. It's a fascinating one. And again, it wasn't me who discovered that, it was children. I had assumed there was more in built environments, but it just depends on where you are.
Excellent, that's really interesting. I tried to pull up one of the pictures of leaves. It's not, probably can't see too much, but I think what is really interesting about this is that twice that's been learners that have showed us something that we had maybe made assumptions about, and it just shows that we do have so much to learn from the learners as well. Lots of angles in nature, honeycomb, yep, great. Thank you. That's a suggested kit list box there. So again, great. If you're looking for ideas, it's there. You can just look at it and pick it up as well. Great. Okay. I'm just going to move on to second level now, unless anybody has any questions about first level that they would like to talk about. I'll take that as a no. We'll have time at the end as well, because it could be possible that questions come up as we're going along. So please, you know, just note them in the chat as we're going along or at the end. It's absolutely fine. So just looking at second level here, so symmetrical pictures should extend into multiple lines of symmetry at this stage, and learners can create images using, they could do it with chalk, or it could be that they're using natural materials. And again, I've seen lots of examples of this on Twitter this week, which has just been lovely to see. One that I saw that I thought was particularly good is it was actually just a line that was in the playground, a bit like somebody was talking about earlier on, and one learner had put leaves and stones and some other things on one side of it, and then their partner had to create the symmetrical image of it. So I thought that was really nice, and it was fun to look at as well. Moving on to shape, you could look at 3D objects within the natural environment, and you could maybe draw some nets on the playground, or you could also look at composite shapes as well, using sticks and trying to find the area or the perimeter of composite shapes. For example, having a square and a triangle right next to each other, or further than that as well. What we have here is a video. There's a wee video here, and I think Iona's going to post that link into the chat. And really, that just looks for Fibonacci examples in real life. So obviously, you're going to look for them when you go outside. But if learners don't know what they're looking for to start with, that can make it a wee bit more challenging. So this video just kind of shows where Fibonacci sequences can be found in real life. So it can be worth having a look at that, and then taking your learners outside to see where they can spot things as well. Another thing that we think would be quite good is having a painted or drawn 10 by 10 grid, like we talked earlier on, because that can help learners practice plotting points as well. You know, for example, 5, 3, and it just gets them into that way of doing that as well. But again, you might not be able to have that, and if you can't, you can draw it with chalk as well. It just takes a wee bit longer. It's also, when it comes to measure, when you're outdoors, it's really important to emphasise why we need to estimate. I don't know about you, but when I was in class, learners used to think that if they got their estimation wrong, it was embarrassing and it was wrong. And I used to really make a point of highlighting, oh, that's, you know, look, they didn't get the answer that they had estimated, but that's fabulous. You know, that just means that next time they'll be a wee bit closer, and really don't just make sure that you're not missing out that estimation, and talking to them about why you have to do that and what the importance of it is as well. And then, of course, we have timed activities as well. So using stopwatches, how many things can they do in a minute, or, you know, there's lots and lots of different things that they can do, and you've got the space outdoors that they can do that. So looking at the last slide for second level, decimals and measure can also be linked together, as learners could use meter sticks to draw lines. They could mark the decimal fractions on them, and you can see from this picture here that we've got the fractions, we've got the percentages, and we've got the decimal fractions in there. So you can just, they could create lines like that depending on, you know, where they are in their journey with that as well. They could collect items, and they could say, I've collected 4 things. This is just a very basic example. 3/4 of what I found were leaves, or 1/4 of what I found was a pine cone. Can you, and then you could ask them, can you convert that into percentages? What was the percentage of leaves that you found, and so on. And you can see down at the bottom one there as well that the leaf has been cut into quarters. I do note that this isn't completely mathematically correct, but it is a good way of building these skills, because you can see that the leaves haven't actually, if you were to measure them exact, it wouldn't be 4 equal parts. But I think the essence of the message is there, and as long as they understand that, that's fine. But again, linking the decimal fractions and percentages into the fractions as well. Algebra as well. Again, I actually earlier on today saw some algebraic equations that people had been putting outside, and that was nice to see as well. So 4 leaves equal 20. What does each leaf represent? Or if for example, a leaf, take away 20 equals 30, then the leaf must equal 50. It's just a wee bit more fun and inventive ways of carrying out algebra rather than sitting doing pages and pages of calculations, which I know, well, I know that some people like to do, but not everybody likes to do that as well. So it's important to note that. What I would say, and I don't have this in the presentation, is just be careful if you are doing place value outside, because it may be, and I've seen some examples of this, that there's been hundreds, tens and ones, and there's been a material put in each of those columns. So it might be that there was leaves put in the hundreds, sticks put in the tens, and stones put in the ones. But just be careful with that, because I think that can give kind of confusing messages to learners, because how do 10 stones represent 1 stick? It doesn't actually. Whereas if you're using Dean's material in school, then the ones, if you've got 10 of them, then they actually equally make a 10 as well. So it's just using the outside materials for the place value may get a little bit confusing. It may not for some learners, but I think it can be quite tricky for some, and makes it a little bit more challenging for them. And the last thing I'm going to look at here is looking at the negative numbers. So you can use chalk to draw number lines if you've got blank lines in your playground. At second level, you're not looking at addition and subtraction. That's into third level, but you are looking at them being able to place negative numbers on a number line. And again, making sure that they are a balance of vertical and horizontal. And I know that earlier on, Juliet mentioned the thermometers are a really good example of vertical number lines as well, and that includes the negative numbers, which is really good as well. But just kind of see things outside in the environment as well, such as, you know, golf scores, things like that as well. So before we move on, does anybody have any questions about second level? Iona, do you want to bring up anything that's in the chat? I could see it kind of moving.
Well, other than we seem to be having a big long conversation about the relative lethalness of the holly in various people's gardens and things like that. Yes, there's a really nice point from Juliet here about talking about approximate representations, and I think that's a really valid mathematical discussion to have, that things that, for example, at first glance appear symmetrical might not be quite perfectly mathematically symmetrical, but the purpose behind them being symmetrical or almost symmetrical is definitely there. And also an idea of fractions, are they approximate fractions or exact fractions? It is a good conversation to actually have there, and it gives you a lot of opportunity to do that if you're working with natural materials. Yes, for S. Harvey, yes, we will make sure the presentation is available for you.
I think Melissa here's talked about orienteering. Yep, and thanks for sharing that link, Melissa. Orienteering, there's so many things you can do for maths there, again, at all different levels as well. We actually had somebody that came out to our school and mapped our school for us. And it was really good, because it saved us a lot of hassle and time as well. But, you know, the learners can draw their own maps as well from what they can represent. But definitely orienteering is great. Different stations, there can be different maths activities. And again, if you're on Twitter, I've seen some examples of that this week as well. So it's worth having a look. And I think most of them have tagged Maths Week Scotland in them. So if you go to hashtag Maths Week Scotland, you'll probably find lots of examples of learning outdoors with maths this week as well. So it's worth having a look at that, I think. So I'm just looking at F. McNabb. We had great fun yesterday drawing a chalk line 1 metre long, estimating it, and then checking it. And they got more accurate each time. And that's to be celebrated with them as well. So look, we're getting better at estimating, and that's what happens the more you do it as well. And then non-straight lines as well. Brilliant. Okay, I'm going to stop talking now, because I'm quite sick of my own voice. And I'm going to hand over to Iona.
Thanks, Jacqueline. So I'll hand over the chat to you as well. So I'll try and keep an eye on it at the same time as well. So really just, I'm aware that there aren't many secondary teachers in the call today, but I think it's worth, in the same way as I found that as a secondary teacher, the work I've done with primary colleagues has been really, really helpful. Understanding where learners are going with third and fourth level can be really helpful if you're teaching at first and second level as well. So we do have to bear in mind, though, that the logistics involved in taking a secondary classroom outdoors, it can be a little bit more complicated, but certainly doable. And really, with a few top tips here, I really would recommend sending out a reminder the day before, and having somebody handling the stragglers in your classroom, because the learners will be coming from all different places, so they may arrive at different times. And so meeting them outside and having a colleague handy near your classroom to redirect anybody who's just turning up a little bit late. Really important in the early stages, but hopefully will settle down as learners get more used to working outside in the secondary context. Obviously, fitting outdoor work into shorter fixed periods of time can be an issue, particularly if your school has quite short periods. So it's maybe worth exploring how maybe you could share time with other departments and work together so you can work on at a longer period of time. It's one of the themes that we're really talking about working with secondary maths practitioners, is thinking about how can you work together more closely with colleagues in other departments, and that's something that we've kind of peppered throughout the third and fourth level slides as well. So moving on to the third level slide, we've got a couple of those. And starting really with ratio and proportion, and really in my experience, ratio is something that's quite often overlooked, or not. We don't necessarily spend a massive amount of time on it, which I think is a shame, because it's a really interesting topic and has fantastic links to fractions and to data and probability, and those links particularly can be overlooked. So this first activity, just by simply collecting samples of leaves of different trees, and then thinking about what those different samples actually tell you about the wider picture, what ratio are the different types in, what fraction of the sample is of each different type, that kind of thing. And then linking it to data by thinking, well, what does that tell you about the trees as a whole, is a nice way to draw it all together. There's a few of the activities on this slide that you may well already do inside. So, for example, finding primes using a sieve of Eratosthenes on 100 square is something you might well have the learners doing on pen and paper. But if you happen to have 100 grid outside, it's a great opportunity to have either marking off the multiples of 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on, or actually having learners stand on them so that they are actually chalking off the composite numbers and leaving the prime numbers uncovered as a team. That's a nice way to do it. If by any chance you can get a chessboard painted on your playground, there's lots and lots of things that you can do with this. So as Jacqueline says, if it's maybe worth asking parent council to help if you don't already have them. But there's lots of things you can do with a chessboard. The one that's outlined here is the classic Chinese proverb of the rice on a chessboard. If you have 1 grain of rice on the first square, 2 grains of rice, 4 grains of rice, 8 grains of rice, and really investigating exponential growth on that. Something we would do with a lot of first and second year classes, but wouldn't it be nice to do it with concrete materials outside and just see how big the pile gets remarkably quickly. But there's lots of other nice things you can do. You could explore knights moves. You could ask children to find as many squares as they can on the chessboard of different sizes, that kind of thing. Lots of things you can do there. Like Jacqueline, I'm not going to go through all of them, but there was just one other thing I was going to say on that one. Looking at angles on a big scale outside, it can be really helpful. There is a very specific misconception about angles that if learners don't think carefully enough about it, and that's when the shape gets bigger, the sides get bigger, the angles get bigger, except they don't. So actually they're it's not that common that they'll be drawing shapes that are bigger than maybe the page in a book or on a piece of paper. So if you can get them outside drawing really big shapes that, for example, if you're investigating the angles in a triangle, it doesn't matter how big the triangle gets, some of the angles is still 180 degrees. So it's a nice thing to be able to do outside on just a larger scale. So looking on the next slide, lots of opportunities to collect data outdoors. As secondary teachers, it's really quite important that we do take the learning on into third level wherever we can. So if we're doing a data collection outdoors, it can be really useful to extend it into third level by looking at sample size and bias in how you collect your data. So lots of opportunity for discussion there. So lots of scope outside for creating patterns in materials and looking at the patterns in numbers that are embedded within these patterns. And so learners would be able to experiment with a range of materials, looking at different geometrical shapes and different symmetries, and investigating what patterns they can create visually and what number patterns that are embedded in this. And then you can look at the numerical analysis of how do you extend that pattern and how could you represent it algebraically as well. So there's lots you could do there. And looking at measurements at third and fourth level, I sometimes feel that there's a bit of a disconnect in learners' measurement skills. It's become a bit abstract and they've become a bit separated out from it because they've moved away from the practical measurement skills that are at first and second level. So if we can get them measuring larger things outdoors, perhaps with a view to going on to calculating areas or perimeters that might be the third and fourth level knowledge, then we can reconnect them with that measurement, those measurement skills, and they can become practical again. We're very used to scaling down when we're drawing scale drawings, so maybe taking the dimensions of something that's big and trying to draw a scale drawing of it on paper. So how often, though, do we ask them to try and draw a scaled up version of something that's actually quite small? So it'd be interesting to try and scale some things up on a really large scale and get learners just to think a little bit differently about using scale. Moving on to fourth level, I think it can be a real misconception that secondary mathematics is too abstract to work outdoors, and hopefully with the examples that we've shared at third level, that's maybe sort of putting that to bed. But it is certainly true that at fourth level the opportunities are thinning out a bit because it does become really quite abstract. But there are some, and here's just a selection of some that I've thought of and I've collected from other places. So remembering, though, as Jacqueline was talking about, those softer skills of problem solving are still there when learners are working outside. And if you add into the mix developing their communication skills and their teamwork skills, there's lots of mathematical contexts where learners in second and third year at school could be using maths of all levels plus their softer skills to solve some quite challenging physical problems outside. I would definitely agree with Jacqueline that an outdoor Cartesian grid in four quadrants, so we can have positive and negative X and Y coordinates, would be incredibly handy for reinforcing plotting points, and then for creating families of points to plot straight lines. Which comes in at fourth level. Having actually tried to do this in a classroom with a big group of third years, it is impossible. You need to go outside to do it, and it's very visual and very practical and really, really helpful. And what's great about this is that it's extendable into National 5 and into higher, because we can be looking at different types of relationships that create curves, circles, that kind of thing. So it can go right up to higher level. We could perhaps be using string or rope to look at continuous functions. And I always like bringing something in at an early level that you can revisit as the maths goes up, and that's certainly one that you can do. So are there any questions about third and fourth level? Any comments, any ideas? We'd love to have any more ideas if there's anybody who's taken their learning outside in secondary.
So there's a link here from Lost about, it's not specific to maths, but there's a number of resources from national organisations that are for third and fourth level. So I think that's a really useful link for people to have. Because again, sometimes you get ideas for maths from other things as well. And then there's Catherine's talking about the tree measurements are great for angles measurement and trigonometry as well, and a link in there for that. I think Maths Week Scotland last year had a measuring trees activity as well, which I'm sure is still on their website. I need to have a look, but I'm pretty sure it is. And then Melissa was just asking for some more examples, and hopefully Lost's post there will help with that as well. But hopefully some of these ideas from this today, Melissa, will be a good start for the people that you're working with as well. So the Maths Week Scotland, I've already mentioned it. It is Maths Week Scotland this week, and really we're looking for people to be sharing what they're doing outdoors. Hashtag Maths Week Scotland, but we would also like you to share it with us if you can, which is at edscot_maths, because we would really appreciate seeing all of this. It means that we can share it wider with people as well. We created packs for Maths Week Scotland, and here we have just some of the, I've just taken some screenshots out of some of the packs as well, and you can see that some of the ideas we've talked about today are here, plus some more as well, so it's worth having a wee look at them. But the link's been posted further up the chat if you want to have a look at that in a bit more detail. The battleships game that I talked about there is in there as well. And then really we've just put a link into further reading as well. So some of it's just the policy and documentation about outdoor learning. This is a link to the STEM Wakelet for outdoor learning. So it's not just maths, there's lots of things in there, but there are lots of maths things in as well there. And I know that there'll be a lot of you here today that don't just teach maths anyway, so you'll be looking for ideas for lots of things as well. So hopefully some of this will help you. And then specific math support on the right hand side. But as I said, I'll put all of these links into one document, and Mary can get that sent out to you when she sends out the link to the video as well. And at that, we're going to hand back to Mary and Mark, who are just going to run over a couple of wee things before the end.
That's great. Thank you very much, Jacqueline and Iona, and really blown away by the kind of the comments in the chat within the chat pane. So thank you very much, colleagues, for sharing ideas and for hints and tips. And as Jacqueline says, we will share these back with you. There's a couple of comments in the chat box around previous webinars, and that's the links there. So we've had 3 this session already. Linda Reid from Garnet Bank Primary in Glasgow talking about her journey with outdoor learning in the school community, and that's the first one. We had a number of Infor partners, so that's like Forestry Scotland, Nature Scotland and so on, talking about how outdoor learning can be used across the full context for learning. 2 weeks ago, we had Susan Say from the digital team talking about how to use digital tools to capture, create and share outdoor learning, and a really nice kind of sway with lots of links from partners in there as well. Just want to kind of flag up to you a really good opportunity if you haven't seen it already. It's a 2-hour kind of module developed by SAPO, and we have a Lost East Ayrshire team with us who's been instrumental in putting this together with SAPO. Natalie, I don't know if you want to invite you to say anything around that module. It's a really good opportunity just to learn a wee bit more about outdoor learning. Jack, do you want to come in, Natalie?
Just briefly, you've really covered it. It was really just to support teachers, and it looks at the benefits of going outdoors, the health benefits, the wider context of learning outdoors, in terms of all the other things that it can add to it. And we've mentioned quite a few things like using natural materials. It kind of expands on the purposes of using those natural materials rather than taking out plastic materials. Just then that helps children connect to the nature and environment, and so it looks at some of the larger, bigger parts of what outdoor learning is about, as well as the very specifics of teaching the curriculum outdoors, and really using that to benefit and enhance the teaching that you're doing inside as well. So it's a really useful new module, so worth looking at.
That's great. Thank you so much, Natalie, for sharing that with us. And just really to say thank you so much to our colleagues Iona and Jacqueline. A really informative presentation with lots of ideas, whether we're starting out or whether we're further down the road with outdoor learning, and indeed taking numeracy and maths outdoors. And just thanks very much to everybody who's been part of the kind of chat and sharing ideas. It's really been appreciated. What we would take, if we'd really appreciate if you could take a moment to fill in the evaluation. That would be really much appreciated, to share your thoughts, your feedback, and what you'll do as a result of attending today's session. And if you can tag us using those tags, that would be much appreciated too. We are going to stay on the line, and a wee question there about where this is going to slides and webinar. It'll be emailed. We will access the slides. Yet what we'll do is we'll save a kind of PDF version of them and send them to you, and we'll email that as soon as the recording is ready. So that will happen as quickly as we can. If you want to stay on the line, we'll stop the recording now, and we'll just have an opportunity to have a quick chat with Jacqueline and Iona if you've got any specific questions, and anyone else who would like to do that. So feel free. I'll stop the webinar now, and thank you very much for your session and your time today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.